The drumming of rain against the grand windows was a hollow soundtrack to the end of my world. Outside, my father's country estate was shrouded in a gray downpour. Inside the library, a far colder storm had reached its peak. "Congratulations, Bobby." My father's voice was a blade, sharp and final. He presented my younger brother with a thick, cream-colored envelope. "You've earned this. All of it. The house, the business, the accounts. You've proven yourself." I sat perfectly still at the vast, polished mahogany table, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap the knuckles were white shields against the tremor threatening to break through. Bobby refused to meet my gaze, his own jaw a rigid line of tense victory. Our mother studied the intricate clasp of her diamond bracelet as if it were the most fascinating artifact in the world. Then, his judgment delivered upon the favored son, my father turned his eyes to me. A slow, cold sneer twisted his lips. "And you?" He didn't need to say more. The unspoken verdict hung in the air, thicker than the scent of old books and leather. The useless one. The dreamer. Too soft, too governed by feeling. I cannot hand the empire I forged to a heart that leads instead of a mind that calculates. We were 5 in that opulent room. The tyrant, the heir, the silent witness, the discreet lawyer, and the ghost. In that moment, I felt less substantial than the dust motes swirling in the dim light. "Let's make it official, Dad," I whispered, the words fraying as they left my lips. "Please, don't." He smirked, a dry, cruel thing. "Move on, Layla. You're an adult. You made your choice when you turned your back on this family's work. Or do you recall your grand declaration? You wanted to do something that mattered." His fingers formed mocking air quotes. "Helping strangers. Seeking no profit, no acclaim. What a noble waste of your years." "You never once asked me why I left," I said, my voice barely audible. "I never cared to." "And you still don't," he finished, slicing off my breath. "This is reality, not one of your charitable fairy tales. Your brother remained. He put in the work. He demonstrated his loyalty." "He's been deceiving you," I stated, the truth a quiet stone dropped into a still pool. "You simply choose not to see it." A short, derisive laugh escaped him. "Listen to the jealousy speaking." The family lawyer, Mr. Caldwell, an elderly man with a perpetually solemn face, shifted in his chair. He clutched a leather folder to his chest like a shield. "If I may," he interjected, his voice a gravelly interruption before the fatal signatures could be scrawled. "There is a pertinent matter everyone should be aware of." My father's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" Mr. Caldwell cleared his throat, meticulously aligning the edges of his papers. "There exists a codicil to your mother's will. It was executed years ago, with a specific instruction from her that it remain sealed, unless a certain condition was met." My grandmother. My heart gave a single, hard thump. She was the only soul who ever saw the resolve behind my quiet, who called my silence a fortress, not a weakness. "What codicil?" My father's tone was pure irritation. "The document stipulates," Mr. Caldwell continued, unfazed, "that it is only to be opened if you ever took formal action to disinherit or exclude your daughter, Layla, from her legacy." My father's face flushed with incredulous anger. Preposterous. She had no authority to dictate such terms. "With all due respect, she did," the lawyer countered, his tone leaving no room for argument. "She retained 51% ownership of the primary holding company. You never challenged the structure. The codicil is legally sound and fully binding." A stifling quiet descended. Bobby's confident posture deflated slightly. Mother's hand froze, her fingers pausing mid-circle around a pearl. Mr. Caldwell turned his gentle, knowing eyes to me. "Miss Layla, would you prefer I read the contents, or will you?" I didn't look away from the envelope in Bobby's grasp, the symbol of my father's kingdom, soon to be handed to his chosen prince. "Read it," I said, my voice finding a new, steady ground. He unfolded the aged paper, the sound crisp in the silent room. "In the event my granddaughter, Layla, is judged unworthy by her father," he read, each word deliberate and clear, "I hereby bequeath to her sole and complete authority over my shareholding. This transfer is effective immediately, conferring all attendant voting rights and control." This amendment nullifies any prior arrangements pertaining to the governance of the company and the estate. For a long moment, the only sound was the softened pattering of rain, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. "Damn it all," my father growled, the words low and venomous. "Which means," Mr. Caldwell clarified, his gaze briefly meeting mine, "your daughter now holds the controlling interest. Today's proceedings regarding the assets under the company's purview are fundamentally void." My father shot to his feet, his chair shrieking in protest against the floor. "This is insanity. She has no conception of how to run this business." "Perhaps not the business you built," I said, rising to face him. My own movement was slow, deliberate. The ground felt firm beneath me for the first time that evening. But I understand leadership. I know how to safeguard what matters. I know how to build something that lasts without breaking the people within it. And I know how to be the woman my grandmother believed I could be. Rage and utter bafflement warred in his expression. "Bobby, she can't possibly." I took one firm step forward, cutting off his sputtering. "You spent my life telling me I was without value," I said, the words not loud, but ironclad. "But my worth was never yours to judge." I turned my head toward the lawyer, the world finally shifting into focus. "Mr. Caldwell, let's move forward. There is much to discuss." My brother stared at the floor, the coveted envelope now a dead weight in his hands. My mother's lips trembled around unspoken words. And my father did not sit. He did not speak. He simply stood, a statue of crumbling dominion, as the foundation of his reign fissured and fell away into silence. The silence that followed was a physical weight, thick and suffocating. My father remained standing, a statue of thwarted will. His lips were a bloodless slash, his jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscle leaping beneath his skin. His knuckles, gripping the carved back of the chair, were white islands in a sea of strained flesh. And in his eyes, the cold, assessing eyes that had always sized up and found me wanting, I saw the impossible, raw, undiluted fear. His fury had been a roaring fire. This silent, stunned dread was an abyss, far more terrifying. He did not shout. The quiet was worse. It wasn't acceptance. It was the silent, gaping disbelief of a king who just felt his scepter turn to sand in his grasp, too preoccupied with subjugating his court to notice the throne itself had crumbled. "Please," I said, gesturing to his chair. My voice held no triumph, no malice. I would not become a mirror of his cruelty. I had not fought for supremacy, but for the simple dignity I had been denied since childhood. "Sit down." He remained rigid, a pillar of defiance in his own ruin. It was Bobby who shattered the quiet, his voice laced with a petulant, wounded outrage. "Wait, this isn't fair." She walked away. She wanted no part of the business, of any of this. She ran off to save puppies or teach poetry to trees, or whatever her little crusade was. "I worked with survivors at domestic violence shelters," I stated, my tone level factual. "I helped secure transitional housing for single mothers. I didn't run away from anything. I ran toward my purpose." "You don't need a seat at this table to change a life." "That's very touching," Bobby sneered, the thick envelope now a pathetic talisman in his hands. "But it doesn't qualify you to run a multi-million-dollar enterprise. You know nothing about it." "I know enough," I said, turning my full gaze upon him, "to have traced the falsified quarterly reports. To have found the transfers to that offshore shell corporation registered to your college roommate. I know about the embezzlement, Bobby." The color drained from his face. "Layla." Our mother's voice finally broke through, a strained, scandalized whisper. "That's enough. This is a family. Must we destroy each other? Now it's a family?" My own voice fractured then, a crack in the careful dam I'd built. "It was a family when you sat in silence every time he called me a liability. When he handed my birthright to him without a single thought for the years I spent setting aside my own dreams, trying to be the peacemaker, trying to hold us together. Where was this precious family then?" "You were never meant for this cutthroat world," she murmured, unable to look at me, her eyes fixed on her intertwined fingers. "I know," I said, the words heavy with a lifetime of understanding. "You all made that exquisitely clear." I turned back to Mr. Caldwell. the one anchor in the room. But my grandmother saw things differently. The lawyer gave a slow, solemn nod. There is more, Miss Layla. The majority stake is not her only bequest. He opened his worn briefcase once more and retrieved a small, hinged box of time-darkened wood. With careful reverence, he opened it. Inside, resting on a bed of faded velvet, was an old, gilded compass. Its familiar face stole my breath, an exact twin to the one that had always sat on her writing desk, which she'd once told me guided her through life's thickest fog when logic alone failed. Beneath it lay a letter, folded with precise care. My name graced the front in her flowing, elegant script. My hands were unsteady as I took it, the paper whispering a secret as I unfolded it. My dearest Layla, if you are reading this, then your father has done precisely what I always feared he might. Do not hate him for it. He is a man forged in a furnace where the clang of power drowns out the whisper of the heart. You, my darling girl, were never fragile. You are the quiet fortitude that has always held this family's fragile pieces together. This compass is yours now, for the path ahead is yours alone to walk. Remember, a true north matters little without the courage to follow it. No matter the noise others make, I have always trusted you to find your way. With all my love, Grandma. The sting in my eyes was sharp, but I blinked, holding the tears at bay. They were not for this room, or these people. They were a private tribute, to be shed later. I looked at Mr. Caldwell and gave a single, firm nod. Let's proceed. He slid the folder, the one containing my father's meticulously prepared documents of my erasure, across the table to me. They were meaningless now, scraps of a defeated plot. As I signed the papers that formally acknowledged my controlling interest, my father found his voice again. It was a low, venomous hiss, stripped of its former power. You think this parchment makes you powerful? He spat. You think she did this out of some doting affection? It was her final act of spite, aimed squarely at me. I met his glare and, for the very first time, saw past the impregnable fortress of the man to the ruins within. Not an iron patriarch, but a shattered one, using ruthlessness as mortar to hold his broken pieces together. No, I replied, my voice soft but clear in the hushed room. She did it because she had faith in me. Because she knew that if this power ever came to me, I would use it to mend, not to break. With those words, I turned and walked out of the library. My spine was straight, my head held high. And with each step away from that room, I felt it, the immense, leaden weight of a lifetime of rejection beginning to loosen its grip. It fell away not with a crash, but like ancient rust, disintegrating into dust behind me, leaving my shoulders strangely, terrifyingly light. The heavy library door closed behind me, a sound more of commencement than conclusion. Beyond it lay not peace, but the first tense silence before a declared war. Power, especially power taken, is a magnet for adversaries. And Bobby, my brother, would never accept this. The throne he had been measured for now sat beyond his reach, and he would dedicate himself to its reclamation. The long, portrait-lined hallway felt like a gauntlet. The eyes of stern ancestors seemed to press in from the gilded frames. But inside, I did not falter from regret or swim in vengeful triumph. This was a profound, unsettling liberation. Decades of biting my tongue, of contorting myself into shapes meant to please a man who saw me as a flaw in his design, all of it was over. I was no longer the ghost in the family machine. The compass in my hand was cold, solid, real. I pushed open the grand front door and stepped into the damp afternoon. The sky was a sheet of battered pewter, and it now released a fine, chilling mist. I walked onto the gravel drive, turning my face up to it, letting the icy pins prickle my skin. Each droplet felt like it was dissolving a layer of the old, heavy varnish of inadequacy I had worn for so long. The sharp creak of the door interrupted the rain's hush. Layla. I turned. Bobby stood in the doorway, backlit by the mansion's glow. The raw, bewildered hurt was gone from his face, replaced by a simmering intensity that made my breath catch. This was not the petulant brother I knew. This was the glimpse of a rival being born. Don't do this, he said, his voice low and strained. I waited, offering no argument, just my presence. He strode toward me, the mist beating on the shoulders of his tailored suit. "You will destroy everything he built. You have no concept of the mechanisms, the pressure, the decisions. You'll steer it onto the rocks with your bleeding heart sentiment." "I would prefer sentiment to systematic fraud," I replied, the steadiness in my own voice surprising me. His controlled facade shattered. "It was mine. He was giving it to me. You had your moment and you threw it away to play saint for strangers. None of this belongs to you." "It was never his to give away entirely," I said, the truth is simple, cold stone. "And I didn't abandon my family. I went searching for something authentic. It seems I found it." "You will regret this," he snarled, the words a naked threat, all pretense of fraternity stripped away. "Perhaps," I acknowledged, holding his furious gaze. "But today I do not." I left him there, a dark figure dissolving into the gray drizzle. The days that followed were a tempest of a different kind. Mr. Caldwell became my steadfast pilot through legal straits, filing the necessary injunctions and notifications. The board's reaction was a predictable cyclone of outrage and panic. My father's old allies, men with voices like grinding stone, blustered and threatened. Bobby worked the phones, a whisper campaign of doubt and character assassination, but the evidence I had compiled, the digital trails, the anomalous invoices, the shell company records, began to seep into crucial conversations. This was not a war of dramatic confrontations. It was a conflict waged in boardroom annexes, over encrypted emails, and in the wary silence between lines of legalese. In the eye of that storm, in the spare corporate office I now used, I would take out my grandmother's compass. I wouldn't even check its direction. I would simply hold its weight in my palm. It didn't feel like it pointed to magnetic north. It felt like it pulled insistently toward the future. A week after the reading, a soft knock broke my concentration. It was Rosa, the housekeeper. In her hands was a small tray bearing 2 porcelain cups of rich hot chocolate, topped with a delicate spire of whipped cream. "I thought you might need some fortification," she said, her voice a warm balm against the sterile office air. I attempted a smile that felt worn at the edges. "You shouldn't have gone to the trouble. You looked like you needed it," she said softly, placing the tray on the desk. She didn't retreat. "In all my years here, no one ever brought me a cup of tea when I was having a rough day. I thought it was time someone broke that particular tradition." Something deep within me quivered, not the old, familiar ache of hurt, but the strange, tender pang of a wound beginning to knit. "Thank you, Rosa." She took the seat opposite me, her work-worn hands folded neatly in her lap. "Would you like to know what I've seen, Miss Layla? The truth of this family?" I met her clear, kind eyes and nodded. "I've been here 28 years, she began. "I've seen your father reduce grown men to trembling apologies. I've seen your brother's charming smile vanish the second someone was no longer of use to him. But you," she said, leaning forward slightly, "you always made a point to look at me. To see me." A tightness gathered in my throat, making words impossible. "You may feel solitary in this fight," she continued. "But you carry a currency they never cultivated, loyalty. The kind that isn't bought, but earned through simple, consistent kindness." I blinked hard against a sudden warmth in my eyes. "Why are you telling me this? Why help me?" "Because a long time ago, someone reached out a hand to me when I was drowning and no one else even noticed," she said, a gentle smile touching her lips. "And because that company out there, the one everyone is fighting over, it doesn't need another conqueror on the throne. It's sick. What it needs is a healer." The morning of the board meeting, I walked into the conference room not with the nervous energy of an usurper, but with the calm resolve of a steward. The atmosphere was a dense fog of hostility and skepticism. I took my seat at the head of the table, a position that felt both alien and inevitable, and let the storm break over me. They unleashed their arsenal, accusations of incompetence, doubts about my vision, thinly veiled threats of mass resignation. A major shareholder, his face florid with indignation, slammed a hand on the table and promised protracted litigation. I waited until the last echo of their outrage faded. Then I stood. "If any person in this room can provide evidence that these documents are forged or their contents inaccurate," I said, my voice clear in the sudden quiet, "I will tender my resignation before this meeting adjourns." I let the silence stretch, a palpable tension before placing the files on the polished wood. The original forensic audit, flagged by a whistleblower I'd protected years ago. The labyrinthine transfer records to a shell corporation named Acheron Holdings. Bank statements with dizzying sequences of numbers. Then I switched on the projector. The grainy black and white footage filled the screen. A timestamp in the corner, 2:17 a.m., 3 weeks prior. The door to the CFO's office, Bobby's office, swung open. His familiar figure entered, moving with a furtive haste. He went straight to the computer, plugged in a small USB drive, and began transferring files. The timestamp aligned perfectly with the creation date of the falsified financial projections used to inflate the value of his division. The room didn't just go quiet, it went dead. The air was sucked out, replaced by a shocked, sterile vacuum. "The truth is not a weapon," I said, breaking the silence. "It is a foundation. And my purpose here is not to bury my brother beneath it, but to rebuild upon it." I turned to Mr. Caldwell, who sat observing with a neutral expression. "My grandmother placed her faith in me not because I am infallible, but because I choose to believe in redemption, even for those who have caused deep hurt. Therefore, I will not be pursuing criminal charges against Bobby Atwood at this time. However, he is suspended from all operational duties, effective immediately, and a full, transparent internal investigation, led by an independent third party, will commence." A sharp intake of breath came from my left. Near the window, an older board member, Eleanor Vance, gave a single, slow nod of approval. Then, from the far end of the table, Mr. Halpern rose to his feet. A founding member, long since retired, but still possessing immense moral authority, his voice was a dry rustle of paper. "I opposed your appointment," he stated plainly, his eyes fixed on mine. I saw a dilettante, a sentimentalist who would prioritize charity over profit. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "Today, you demonstrated that profit built on fraud is the greatest charity of all, a gift to the corrupt. You reminded this old man of the oath we took decades ago, not to shareholders, but to each other and to the community that gave us purpose. It was never about amassing power. It was about being worthy of the responsibility." With his words, I felt the seismic shift. The tide of resentment didn't just halt, it began, slowly and irrevocably, to turn. Bobby was conspicuously absent in the days that followed. No defiant statements, no legal maneuvers. Just a profound, echoing silence. Then a letter arrived on simple stationery, his handwriting unmistakably tense. "Layla, I don't expect, nor do I deserve, forgiveness. I need you to understand. It was never solely about the money or the title. It was about being seen. For my entire life, it seemed you effortlessly held the love I was perpetually grasping for. Perhaps you didn't just receive it. Perhaps you cultivated it in a soil I never learned to tend. I hope, one day, to comprehend how. Bobby." I read it 3 times. Then, I folded it with care and placed it in the wooden box beside my grandmother's compass. Some conflicts do not end with a decisive slash, but with a quiet exhale. Some beginnings are born not from victory, but from a moment of unraveled honesty. A month drifted by. The corporate atmosphere transformed. It wasn't quieter, if anything, the halls buzzed with a new, purposeful energy. It was lighter, as if a ceiling of low, oppressive cloud had been lifted. The official retraction of the false allegations made headlines, but the real change happened in the subtler spaces, in meetings where dissenting opinions were voiced without fear, in emails that prioritized clarity over cunning. Yet, one silence remained absolute. My father had vanished from the landscape of my life. I assumed he was in some distant retreat, nursing his fury and his wounded pride into a permanent, bitter state. I was wrong. On a still Sunday morning, the office empty and sunlit, I entered to find him seated in the visitor's chair across from my desk. He wasn't looking at the skyline or the bookshelves. He was simply staring at his own hands, folded in his lap. He looked diminished. The imposing, armor-like suit was replaced with a simple sweater. The arrogance that had always straightened his spine was gone, leaving a startling frailty in its wake. "I had to see it," he said, his voice rough from disuse. He didn't look up. I had to confirm you hadn't reduced it all to ashes. I said nothing, taking my seat, allowing him the space to speak. You were right. The words seemed to cost him a tremendous effort. About Bobby. About the corruption. About how I let this enterprise forget its soul. Finally, his eyes met mine. They held not anger, but a hollowed-out exhaustion. Why come now, after all this time? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he drew a worn photograph from his inner pocket and slid it across the desk. It was a snapshot from a lifetime ago. Me, maybe 12, smeared with garish watercolor paints, beaming with pride as I held up a hopelessly messy canvas. Beside me, my grandmother was caught in a moment of unrestrained, joyful laughter, her arm tight around my shoulders. She always said you would be the one to save this family from itself, he murmured, his finger tracing the edge of the photo. I refused to believe her. Because if she was correct, it meant my entire life's work, my philosophy, was a failure. You didn't fail, I said, the compassion in my own voice surprising me. You simply built according to a flawed blueprint. He let out a long, shaky breath, studying his palms as if reading a map of his regrets. I came today because there is a sentence I have never uttered. One I convinced myself was a sign of weakness. He lifted his gaze, and in it I saw the boy he must have once been, lost beneath a lifetime of calcified ruthlessness. I am sorry, Layla. For every dismissive word. For every missed moment. For not seeing you. I am profoundly sorry. A hard knot formed in my chest. The wounded part of me, the ghost of the invisible girl, wanted to hurl the apology back, to let him feel the chill of irrevocability. But a deeper, wiser part understood the simple, tragic math: hurt people, hurt people. And the cycle only breaks when someone chooses, deliberately, not to reciprocate the injury. I met his weary, shame-filled eyes and gave a slow, accepting nod. Thank you for saying that. He stood, moving with an old man's stiffness. At the threshold, he paused. I do not ask for your grace. I only needed to speak the words. Before the opportunity was lost forever. Then don't let it be lost, I replied, my voice gentle but firm. The blueprint can be redrawn. It is not too late to fix what your hands can still reach. He offered no reply, no promises. Only one last, long look, a look that seemed to finally, truly, see me before he turned and walked away, leaving the quiet sunlight and the echo of a shattered silence in his wake. 2 weeks after my father's visit, Rosa appeared in my office doorway once more. This time, she carried not a tray, but a simple manila folder, its edges softened by time. What's this? I asked, setting aside my pen. A ledger of a different sort, she said, placing it gently on the desk before me. Every employee your father dismissed over the last 15 years for asking too many questions, challenging unsafe shortcuts, or refusing to falsify data. I kept the list. I thought, you might want to do something about it. I opened the folder. It was not a formal report, but a collection of notes, printed emails, and meticulous notes in Rosa's own hand. Name after name. Stories of integrity met with immediate termination. Engineers, accountants, a safety inspector, a head of sustainability. I read each one, a cold, heavy feeling settling in my stomach as the scale of the systemic silencing became clear. That afternoon, we drafted letters. Not form letters, but personal, individually typed messages. They contained no requests for justification, no humiliating interviews. Simply an acknowledgement, your integrity was noted. It was met wrongly. If the work still calls to you, a place is open. We sent them out, not as a publicity gesture, but as a quiet act of restorative justice. Legacy, I was learning, is not a vault of gold passed down a bloodline. It is the echo you leave in the lives of others. Months unfurled. The company, once a sleek machine of cold efficiency, began to hum with a different frequency. It was not a dazzling transformation, but a gradual warming, like stones soaking up the sun after a long winter. Trust, once the scarcest commodity, began a hesitant, tender regrowth. Bobby never sought reinstatement. The business world, it seemed, had lost its glitter for him. But one afternoon, he texted a simple question. Coffee? We met at a neutral, quiet cafe. There were no grand pronouncements, no relitigation of past betrayals. We talked about inconsequential things of film he'd seen, the stubborn perennials in my new garden. It was awkward, fragile, but it was a conversation. Not as CEO and disgraced former executive, but as a brother and sister navigating the vast, unmapped territory between a broken past and an uncertain future. It was a start. My father maintained his physical distance, a specter absent from the halls he once ruled. Then a piece of mail arrived at my office, addressed in a generic clerical font. It was a donation confirmation from the Willow Creek Women's Shelter. The amount was a staggering 7 figures. The donor field listed my name. There was no accompanying letter, no flourish of a signature. It was a transaction, silent and profound. His only message, translated from the language of money, which was the only lexicon he had ever truly mastered: I am listening. I am trying. And for now, that was enough. It had to be. Because the victory I had secured was not the one I had imagined in my deepest, most secret hurts. I did not achieve revenge, which is a feast that leaves you emptier. I attained something more durable, respect, earned in the crucible of crisis. A profound, inner peace born from acting in alignment with my own conscience. And a future, at last, of my own design, secure, unassailable. Now, when I enter the boardroom, the air is clear. I do not sense the wary, calculating whispers that used to trail my father like smoke. Instead, I am aware of the sound of footsteps keeping pace with mine. The team walking alongside me, not out of fear or blind obedience, but because they have chosen to believe in the direction we are headed. They have chosen to believe the path I am following, guided by an old gilded compass and a legacy of quiet strength, leads somewhere worthy. And the origin of it all circles back to a single, searing moment in a rain-lashed library, when a man who could only measure worth in dominance looked at his daughter and passed a final, damning judgment: "You are a useless child." He was not speaking of my potential. He was diagnosing his own blindness. And all I ever did, from that day forward, was learn to see myself clearly, and in doing so, prove his vision catastrophically wrong.